I never imagined that one day my life would change so completely, unraveling into betrayal and heartbreak. Ethan and I had built a life full of dreams, laughter, and promises. He was my best friend, my rock, my other half. I believed we would be together forever. I loved him deeply, trusting him in ways I'd never trusted anyone. It was a love that seemed destined to last forever, and the thought of losing him felt impossible. Our life together was like a dream, one that I never wanted to wake up from. We built a home, not just physically but emotionally, filled with moments of joy and deep, intimate conversations. We talked about our hopes for the future, our plans, and our desires. We laughed over silly things, an inside joke that only the two of us understood, the quiet comfort of just being in each other's presence. There was nothing I wanted more than to grow old with him, to watch our story unfold, hand in hand, for the rest of our lives. But life doesn't always go as we expect. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the world as I knew it began to unravel. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow across our living room, making the room feel warm and inviting. I was preparing dinner, humming to myself, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing just beyond the door. When Ethan walked through the door, something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first, but there was a hardness in his eyes, a tension in his posture. He was usually so calm, so steady, but today he seemed like a different person. My heart skipped a beat. I thought he was just having a bad day, that maybe work had been difficult. But instead of the usual greeting or the smile I had come to expect, he just stood there, looking at me with those eyes that once were filled with love and warmth but were now cold, distant, and angry. "Sofia," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "We need to talk." The air felt thick, as if the ground beneath me had shifted without warning. I felt a sense of unease spread through me, like a cold wind creeping up my spine. I put the spatula down, my hands suddenly clammy, and turned to face him. "I've been thinking," he continued, his voice strangely composed, but there was a sharp edge to it. "And I think it's time we end things." I froze. The words didn't make sense. "End things? What do you mean?" "I want a divorce," he said, as though he were telling me about the weather. No emotion. Just cold, hard facts. The words didn't register at first. Divorce? My mind scrambled to catch up. I was still holding the spatula, as if by doing so, I could anchor myself to something solid. "Ethan, what are you talking about? We've been fine. We've had our disagreements, but, a divorce?" I felt my chest tighten, my heart racing as if I had just sprinted miles. "What's going on? Why are you doing this?" He didn't look at me when he spoke next, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder, as if he couldn't bear to look at me. "I know you're cheating on me, Sofia," he said, his voice colder than ever. The accusation hit me like a slap to the face. "Cheating?" I repeated, the word foreign on my tongue. I couldn't believe it. "I would never cheat on you, Ethan. You know that." His eyes hardened. "Don't lie to me," he said flatly. "I've seen the signs. The way you've been acting, the late nights out, the rumors I've heard from our friends." His voice trailed off, and his words felt like daggers, piercing into my heart. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I've been faithful to you. I haven't done anything wrong." But Ethan wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind, and no matter how much I protested, no matter how many times I tried to explain, he wouldn't hear me. The accusations seemed to grow more specific as he went on, telling me about things I hadn't even noticed, moments I had never thought twice about. My late nights at work. A text message from a friend that had apparently seemed too friendly. None of it made sense. It was like he had created a story in his head, and no matter how much I tried to deny it, he was determined to believe it. The next few days were a blur of confusion, anger, and heartbreak. Ethan's behavior was cold, distant. Every word out of his mouth seemed to be a reminder of the distance between us. He became unreachable, a stranger standing in the place of the man I had once called my best friend. As the days passed, I felt myself slipping further away from him, from everything I thought I knew. I wanted to understand. I needed to understand why he was doing this. What had caused him to believe these lies? But every attempt to talk to him only seemed to make things worse. His anger was like a brick wall, unyielding and cold. Desperation led me to confide in someone I trusted, my stepsister, Laura. Laura had been a part of my life for as long as I could remember. She had always been there for me through thick and thin, listening to my hopes and fears, offering advice and comfort when I needed it. She was someone I trusted implicitly, someone I believed would always have my back. I reached out to her, hoping she could offer me some clarity, some explanation for Ethan's strange behavior. I told her everything, the accusations, the coldness, the pain that was slowly consuming me. She listened intently, offering words of comfort, reassuring me that this would all blow over. "You'll see," she said, squeezing my hand gently. "Ethan just needs time. He'll come around. This isn't who he really is. He's just confused." Her words soothed me, and for a while, I believed her. But then things began to change. Slowly, subtly, Laura started acting different. She would avoid eye contact with me when we spoke, and whenever I mentioned Ethan, she would quickly change the subject. She seemed uncomfortable in my presence, as though my pain was something she couldn't bear to witness. It was as if she were slipping away from me. At first, I dismissed it, thinking that maybe I was just being too sensitive, overwhelmed by everything happening in my life. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that something wasn't right. The unease was unmistakable, and it gnawed at me, creeping into my thoughts when I least expected it. One day, after another fight with Ethan, I found myself alone in our bedroom. The house felt empty, devoid of the warmth and love it had once held. I sat on the edge of our bed, my mind swirling with 1,000 questions. I tried to focus on anything other than the pain, anything to distract me from the agony of losing the man I had loved so deeply. That's when I noticed it. A small envelope, tucked behind one of Ethan's sweaters in the closet. It looked out of place, almost as if someone had deliberately hidden it there. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. I pulled the envelope out and opened it, hoping to find some kind of explanation, some clue that would finally make sense of this madness. Inside, there was a hotel receipt. My mind raced as I stared at the date, just a few days before. It felt like time had stopped. I turned the receipt over and saw words scribbled hastily on the back: "Meet me, 8 p.m. Same place. L." My breath caught in my throat. L. Laura. My sister. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, and I felt my world tilt beneath me. How could she do this to me? How could she, the one person I had trusted more than anyone, be the one to betray me in such a cruel, devastating way? I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. All the memories of our shared laughter, our deep conversations, everything I thought was solid, started to crumble. How had I not seen it? How had I not noticed the signs? The days that followed were a blur of numbness. I felt like a stranger in my own home, like I was moving through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, from which I couldn't wake up. The shock of it all had left me reeling, and I didn't know how to process the overwhelming weight of the betrayal. But I knew one thing. I needed answers. I needed to confront them, to understand why they had done this to me. And so, I waited. One evening, the rain poured outside, a steady rhythm against the windows, a reminder of the storm raging inside me. I knew Ethan and Laura would be together. I sat in the living room, waiting, my heart pounding in my chest. When they walked in, laughing together, their smiles faltered the moment they saw me. Laura's face turned pale, and I could see the guilt flicker in her eyes. Ethan didn't even look at me. He just stood there, silent, like he had already made his choice. "Why?" I asked. I stood there, the words burning in my throat, my chest tight with the weight of everything I had just discovered. "Why?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Why would you do this to me?" The room felt like it was closing in on me, the air thick and heavy, as if the betrayal was suffocating me. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Ethan didn't say anything, his face unreadable, his eyes locked on the floor as though avoiding the truth. Finally, Laura spoke, and the words that came from her mouth hit me harder than anything else. "You don't understand, Sofia," she said, bitterness dripping from every syllable. "You've always had everything. You've always been the one everyone admired, perfect, successful, loved. I was always in your shadow." My heart sank. It was like a punch to the gut, and I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes. My own sister, the person I trusted more than anyone else, was filled with so much resentment and bitterness that she had allowed it to fester and lead her to hurt me in the worst possible way. "You were always the one everyone turned to. The perfect little family, the perfect little life. I've been overlooked my entire life, Sofia. You were always the golden child. No one ever noticed me, not really. I was just there, standing behind you," she continued, her voice rising with frustration. Her words stung, but they also left me feeling hollow. I had never, in all the years we had spent together, thought for a second that Laura felt this way. I thought we were close. I had always shared my dreams with her, my fears, my hopes for the future. I had trusted her with my vulnerabilities. But somehow, in her eyes, it wasn't enough. My happiness, my success, had only ever been a reminder of what she didn't have. I never realized how deeply her jealousy had grown. How could I have been so blind? "You think you've always had everything, Sofia," Laura said, taking a step closer, her expression hard. "But you never had to fight for anything. You never had to struggle. Everything came so easily for you. I thought that if I could just take something from you, if I could take Ethan from you, maybe I'd finally feel like I mattered. Maybe I could get out of your shadow and be seen." The words echoed in my mind, and I could feel my whole world crumbling around me. I had never wanted to overshadow her. Never. In my mind, we were a team, two sisters who loved each other, who could lean on one another. How had it all turned into this? How had love and trust turned into resentment and betrayal? I turned to Ethan, hoping to see some glimmer of regret in his eyes, but instead, I found nothing. His face was emotionless, detached, as if he had already written me out of the story of his life. "We're done, Sofia," he said, his voice flat, almost indifferent. "I don't want this anymore. You need to move on." The words cut deeper than I ever imagined. There was no emotion, no remorse in his tone. It was final. And with those words, it felt as though everything I had once held dear was slipping away from me, as if I was being erased from his life without a second thought. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart raced in my chest, and my breathing quickened. This couldn't be happening. Ethan, the man I had trusted with my heart, was standing before me, cold and resolute, as if I was just another chapter in his life that he was closing without a second glance. And Laura, my own sister, was standing beside him, her betrayal as sharp as the knife she had plunged into my heart. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. The pain was so overwhelming that it was like a weight pressing down on me, pushing all the air from my lungs. Finally, I found my voice, shaky but determined. "So this is it? This is how you've chosen to end it? With no explanation, no remorse?" Laura shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking to Ethan before she looked away, her hands wringing together in a nervous gesture. "You don't get it, Sofia. You're not the only one who's been hurting. I've had my own struggles, my own pain. But I've always been invisible to everyone, especially to you. And now, maybe I'll finally get what I deserve. Maybe I'll finally matter." Ethan didn't add anything more. He simply stood there, as though he had already decided everything that needed to be said. The finality of it hit me hard, and for a second, I felt like I was drowning in my own grief. I could no longer stand in that house, in that place filled with memories that now felt tainted and broken. I turned and walked out of the room, my steps heavy, my heart breaking with every step I took. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. The days that followed were a blur of emptiness and confusion. I went through the motions, trying to breathe, trying to survive, but it felt like the world had lost its color. I couldn't understand how the people I loved most had turned on me so easily. The pain was unbearable, and yet I had to face it. The divorce went through quickly, without any resistance from me. I couldn't fight for something that had already died. I had to let go of the life I thought I would have, the future I had planned with Ethan. And though it hurt more than anything I'd ever experienced, I knew I couldn't stay in the place where I had been betrayed. I moved out of the house into a small apartment, one that felt foreign and cold at first. It was a stark contrast to the life I had shared with Ethan, but there was a certain freedom in it. A small space that was mine, a place where I could begin to rebuild. The walls felt empty at first, but I slowly started to make it my own. I filled it with things that brought me comfort, plants, art, photographs, little things that reminded me that I could still find joy, even in the midst of heartbreak. I threw myself into therapy, into talking through the layers of pain and confusion that weighed on me. Slowly, I began to heal, though it felt like an uphill battle. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. The act of creating, of putting my emotions on canvas, became a form of therapy. I could feel the weight lifting as I poured my feelings into each stroke of color. And then, months later, I met Alex. It was in a small bookstore, the kind that smelled of old pages and coffee, the kind of place I used to visit with Ethan before everything fell apart. I was browsing the shelves, distracted by the comfort of familiar titles, when I noticed him. He was standing a few feet away, reaching for a novel I had just picked up. Our hands brushed lightly, and he smiled. "I swear I was just going to grab that one," he said with a chuckle, his eyes warm and kind. We began talking, about books, about life, about simple things that didn't carry the weight of betrayal. Alex didn't know my story, and he didn't need to. He listened when I spoke, but he didn't push for details. He just shared in the small moments of joy that life still had to offer. As time passed, we started meeting regularly, for coffee, for walks in the park, for quiet evenings in cozy corners of the city. There was no rush between us. Alex wasn't trying to fix me, he was simply there, offering kindness, understanding, and patience. Slowly, his presence began to heal the empty spaces in my heart, and little by little, I allowed myself to trust again. It was through Alex that I rediscovered the softness in life, the small moments of happiness that I had once thought lost forever. He didn't demand anything from me, but in his presence, I began to remember what it was like to feel whole again. As our relationship deepened, I realized that I had healed. Not completely, not all at once, but I had found a way to rebuild, to move forward. The past had left scars, but those scars were no longer chains. They had become part of my story, part of the person I was becoming. One afternoon, as we walked along the river, Alex took my hand, his fingers gently intertwining with mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. The wounds of the past still ached, but they no longer defined me. I had learned to let go, to forgive, most of all, to forgive myself. Looking out over the water, the sunset casting a golden glow across the surface, I knew that I had found my way back. Life had been cruel, but it had also shown me my strength. I wasn't the same person I had been, but in a way, that was a gift. I had learned the value of love, trust, and self-worth. As Alex and I stood there, the warmth of his hand in mine, I realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was mine to write, with love, with hope, and with a future filled with endless possibilities. After that evening by the water, I found myself thinking more and more about what I had been through, about everything I had lost, and everything I had gained in the process. The grief of losing my marriage, the betrayal from my sister, the shame I had felt when my world had been turned upside down, it wasn't something I could easily shake off. But there was something different now. Something had shifted inside me. The more I spent time with Alex, the more I realized just how much I had been holding on to the past. The memories of Ethan and Laura were no longer my guiding force, they were just fragments of a life I no longer recognized. I no longer needed to hold on to their betrayal to define who I was. My worth didn't rest on their actions or their lies. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, piece by piece. And each day, I felt myself growing stronger, more resilient. But the process wasn't without its challenges. Some days, the memories of what had happened to me would come rushing back, like a flood of emotions that I couldn't control. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I had been the one to suffer so much. The whys and the hows would circle my mind like an endless loop. There were moments when I felt tempted to reach out to Laura, to demand answers, to ask why she had chosen to destroy me. But I knew deep down that getting those answers would never give me peace. It was not the closure I needed. I didn't need her to explain herself to me. I had already given her too much space in my heart, and it was time to take that space back. And then there was Ethan. I still had moments when I thought about what had gone wrong, when I wondered if there was something I had missed, some sign that could have prevented the collapse of everything I had once believed in. I still wondered how he could have turned so cold, how he could have chosen to believe rumors and lies over the woman he had once loved. But as time passed, those questions became less frequent. I began to understand that the answers weren't as important as I had thought. I couldn't change what had happened, and I didn't need to. The truth was, I had outgrown that version of myself. The woman who had been betrayed, broken, and lost was still there, but she wasn't the one in control anymore. I was. And that realization gave me more strength than anything else. Through all of this, Alex had been my constant, a calm in the storm. His gentle support had never wavered, even when I felt unworthy of it. He never tried to rush me, never pushed me to forget what had happened or to move on before I was ready. He simply let me be. That was one of the things I had come to love most about him, his patience. He didn't try to fix me or smooth over my pain. He understood that healing wasn't linear, and he accepted me with all my broken pieces. Over time, I began to share more with Alex, not just the painful parts of my past, but also the things I had loved before everything fell apart. I told him about my childhood, my dreams, my favorite books, the music that had always spoken to my soul. I had forgotten so much about what had once brought me joy. In the midst of the pain, I had pushed away the things that had once filled me with purpose. But with Alex, I started to rediscover those things. We spent evenings in bookstores, reading together, laughing about silly things, sharing our thoughts. Sometimes, we would take long walks, just talking about life and what we wanted from it. In those moments, I felt a sense of peace I had never thought I would experience again. One afternoon, we decided to take a trip to the countryside. Alex had suggested it, wanting to show me a small cabin that his family owned by a lake. I agreed, knowing that a change of scenery might be just what I needed. The drive was quiet but comfortable, the car filled with the soft hum of the engine and the occasional snippet of a song we both liked. We didn't talk much, but there was something incredibly soothing about simply being together, not feeling the pressure to fill the silence. When we arrived, the cabin was even more charming than I had imagined, tucked away in the woods, surrounded by tall trees and the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. We spent the weekend there, hiking, cooking meals together, and exploring the area around the lake. One evening, as the sun began to set, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the colors of the sky change. The lake mirrored the sky, a perfect reflection of the beauty surrounding us. It was in that moment, sitting next to Alex, feeling the warmth of his presence, that I realized just how far I had come. It wasn't just about healing from the past anymore. It was about embracing the possibility of something new. Something good. Something healthy. With Alex, I felt like I was being given the chance to live a life without fear, a life without the weight of betrayal and heartache. That weekend, we talked about our future. We spoke of dreams, of places we wanted to visit, of the simple joys we could share. It was the first time in a long time that I could imagine a future that didn't feel tainted by the past. It was a future where love was a choice, not a trap. A future where trust could be rebuilt, one small piece at a time. After returning from the cabin, life slowly began to take on a new rhythm. I focused more on my painting, pouring my emotions into each piece, finding new ways to express the things I had once kept buried. I began to exhibit my work in local galleries, surprising myself with how much I had grown. The colors on the canvas became an extension of my own healing journey, a way to share the things I had been through without needing to speak the words. But even as I embraced the present, I still found myself occasionally reaching out to the past, just to see if I could make sense of it. I visited the old house, the one Ethan and I had shared, wanting to see how it had changed. The new owners had painted the walls, replaced the furniture, and made it their own. It looked different, almost unrecognizable. But when I stepped inside, it felt strangely empty. I realized that it wasn't the house that held the memories, but the people. And those people, Ethan, Laura, were no longer a part of my life. They had been a chapter, an important one, but a chapter that had closed. I left the house that day, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. I didn't need the past anymore to define me. I was free. In the months that followed, Alex and I grew closer. We made plans together, talking about a future that was now filled with promise. We traveled to new places, tried new things, and shared experiences that brought us even closer. With every passing day, I felt like I was discovering more about myself and the world around me. One evening, after a long day of hiking in the mountains, Alex and I sat on the edge of a cliff, watching the stars begin to appear. The silence between us was peaceful, comfortable. "I've never felt so at peace in my life," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for being part of this healing journey. I don't think I would have made it this far without you." Alex turned to me, his eyes filled with warmth. "You did all the hard work, Sofia," he said gently. "You've always had the strength inside you. I just helped you remember it." And in that moment, as I looked out at the vast sky, I realized that I had come full circle. I had healed, I had found love again, and I had found peace. The future was no longer something to fear, it was something to embrace. With Alex by my side, I knew that the story of my life was just beginning. As the weeks passed, life began to settle into a rhythm that, for the first time in years, felt peaceful. The ache in my heart was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but it no longer had the power to consume me. I had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past or forgetting the hurt, it was about learning to live with it, about understanding that my scars did not define me, but were simply markers of how far I had come. Alex had become a quiet presence in my life, steady and kind, offering me a balance that I hadn't even known I was missing. We spent countless hours together, talking about everything and nothing. At first, it was small talk, superficial things like our favorite movies, childhood memories, or the best places to eat in the city. But as our relationship deepened, our conversations grew more intimate. We talked about our fears, our hopes for the future, and the pain that we had both carried for so long. I shared my story with him, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the months of confusion and sadness. He listened intently, never once interrupting or trying to offer easy solutions. He didn't say things like, "You'll get over it," or "It's time to move on." He simply let me speak, letting me release the emotions I had kept bottled up for so long. In that safe space, I began to let go of the anger and resentment I had been holding on to. It wasn't that I had forgiven Ethan or Laura, but I had learned to forgive myself. I had spent so many months blaming myself, wondering if I had missed something, if I had somehow failed to see the signs. But with Alex, I realized that the choices they had made were not mine to carry. I had been a victim of their betrayal, but that didn't mean I had to continue living in their shadow. Through those months of reflection, I began to redefine what love meant to me. For so long, I had equated love with ownership, with a sense of entitlement, as though I was entitled to someone's loyalty simply because I had given them mine. But love, I realized, was never about ownership. It was about choice. Love was about mutual respect, trust, and understanding. It was about two people choosing to be together because they wanted to be, not because they had to be. This new perspective shifted something inside me. I began to see the world differently. I started to look at people, not through the lens of expectation or fear, but through the lens of possibility. The possibility of new relationships, of new beginnings. I began to meet new people, to form connections that weren't tainted by my past. One afternoon, Alex and I attended a gallery opening for a local artist. As we wandered through the exhibit, I marveled at the way the artist had captured so much emotion with just a few strokes of paint. The colors on the canvases were alive, full of energy and movement. I was inspired. "I've always wanted to exhibit my paintings, you know," I said to Alex as we moved through the room. "But I've been afraid. Afraid of what people would think of me, afraid that they wouldn't understand the things I've been through. But after seeing this, I think it's time I stopped hiding." Alex smiled, his eyes lighting up. "I think you should. You have so much to share with the world, Sofia. You just have to let them see it." His encouragement gave me the push I needed. The next day, I called a local gallery and inquired about exhibiting my work. I was nervous, terrified even, that my paintings wouldn't be good enough. But as soon as I made that first step, I felt a sense of liberation. I was no longer hiding in the shadows of my past. I was stepping into the light. The process of preparing for my first exhibition was a whirlwind of emotions. I spent days selecting the pieces I felt most proud of, the ones that represented not just my pain but my growth. My paintings had always been an outlet for my emotions, a way for me to process the things I couldn't put into words. And now, I was going to share them with others. When the day of the exhibition arrived, I stood in front of the gallery, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what to expect, but as the evening progressed, I was overwhelmed by the support and admiration I received from the guests. People were genuinely moved by the stories behind each painting, and I found myself talking about my journey with a sense of pride, not shame. The exhibition was a success, and for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. I realized that I didn't need validation from anyone else to feel worthy. I had already found my own sense of self-worth. I had reclaimed my life, my voice, my passion. As the weeks turned into months, my relationship with Alex continued to blossom. We traveled to new places together, deepening our connection. We learned more about each other with every passing day, sharing moments of joy and tenderness. But it wasn't just about the relationship, it was about me. About what I had become. I realized that I no longer needed to be defined by my past. The betrayal, the pain, the heartbreak, it no longer had a hold on me. I had healed, but more importantly, I had grown. I had become someone stronger, more resilient. I had found my own strength, my own voice, and I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of, one full of love, laughter, and possibility. One evening, as we sat on the porch of the cabin by the lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Alex took my hand. There was something in the way he looked at me, something that spoke of a deep connection, a shared understanding. "You've come so far," he said softly, his voice full of admiration. "I'm proud of you." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. "I couldn't have done it without you." In that moment, I realized that love, true love, wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about growing through it, evolving into the best version of yourself, and sharing that growth with someone who saw you for who you truly were. With Alex, I had found a love that wasn't built on promises or expectations, but on trust, respect, and mutual admiration. And as we sat together, watching the world unfold before us, I knew that this was just the beginning. There were still many chapters left to write in my life, many more adventures to be had. But no matter what came next, I knew I was ready. Because I had already survived the hardest part, I had survived myself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized that in letting go of the past, I had found the freedom to embrace a future I had once thought was lost. With Alex by my side and a heart finally at peace, I knew that the best chapters of my life were still waiting to be written.